Grace Brown had exactly 5 seconds to make a decision that would change her life forever. 5 seconds. That's all it took for her world to tilt on its axis. There she stood in the middle of a crowded downtown bar on a Friday night, her hands trembling, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. And 20 feet away, laughing like he didn't have a care in the world, was Terl, her ex-boyfriend. The man who'd spent 6 months convincing her she was crazy for questioning him. The man who swore she was just a friend. Except now, Terrell's arm was wrapped around her waist. The same woman he'd gaslit Grace about for half a year. The same woman whose name had been a source of countless fights, tears, and sleepless nights. Have you ever been so hurt, so betrayed by someone you loved, that logic just shut off? Have you ever felt your chest tighten watching the person who destroyed you move on like you never mattered? Like those months of pain, those nights you cried yourself to sleep, those moments you questioned your own sanity, like none of it even registered in their world. That's where Grace was. Standing frozen. Watching the man who'd shattered her trust parade his lies in public like trophies. And here's the thing about pain, sometimes it doesn't make you weak. Sometimes it makes you reckless. Grace's eyes scanned the bar, desperate for an escape, a distraction, anything to stop the rising tide of humiliation flooding her chest. That's when she saw him. A man sitting alone at the bar. Expensive suit. Dark eyes that seemed to notice everything even when he wasn't looking. The kind of face that made smart women do dangerously stupid things. Grace didn't think. Thinking would have stopped her. Thinking would have reminded her that she was a kindergarten teacher who went to bed by 10 and meal prepped on Sundays. Thinking would have told her this was insane. So she didn't think. She walked straight toward the stranger. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor. Her pulse raced. And before she could second-guess herself, before fear could catch up with impulse, Grace kissed him. But here's what she didn't know. What she couldn't have known in that desperate, impulsive moment. The stranger wasn't just anyone. And that kiss? It wasn't just a kiss. It was the beginning of everything. Before we go any further into Grace's story, I need you to do something for me. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Lagos, Seoul, London, New York, wherever you are, let me know. Your engagement keeps these stories alive, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Hit that subscribe button right now because this story will have you on the edge of your seat from start to finish. Now, let's get back to Grace and the kiss that changed everything. The stranger went completely still. For a heartbeat, maybe two, Grace felt his surprise. Not shock, this man didn't seem like the type who shocked easily, but surprise, like unexpected things happened to him often enough that he learned to process them with calm precision. Then everything shifted. His hand moved to her waist. Firm. Possessive. Steady in a way that sent electricity straight down her spine. And he kissed her back with an intensity that made her knees weak, made her forget where she was, made her forget this was supposed to be fake. Because this didn't feel fake. When Grace finally pulled away, breathless and slightly dizzy, those dark eyes studied her with curiosity that felt dangerous. Not threatening. Just aware. Like he could see straight through the performance to the broken pieces underneath. I apologize, Grace whispered, reality crashing back. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. I just needed to make someone jealous, he finished for her. His voice was smooth, accented, like expensive whiskey warming your chest on a cold night. His gaze shifted past her shoulder, and she watched something flicker across his expression. The man in the gray suit. The one watching us like he wants to start a war. Grace's heart dropped into her stomach. You noticed? A slight smile touched his lips, barely there, but devastating. I notice everything. He stood, and Grace had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. He was tall, but it wasn't just his height. It was the way he carried himself. The way his presence seemed to command every inch of space around him without demanding anything at all. The way other people in the bar subtly shifted, giving him room they didn't realize they were giving. I'm Siwoo, he said. Not Kang Ji-hoon. Just Siwoo. Simple. Direct. Grace, she managed, her voice barely audible over the bar music. Well, Grace, Siwoo said, and the way her name sounded in his mouth made her chest tighten. If we're going to sell this performance, we should make it convincing. Before she could ask what he meant, she felt it. That familiar, unwelcome presence closing in. Terl. His anger hit the space between them like a wave. Grace, what the hell are you doing? 6 months ago, that tone would have made her shrink. Would have made her apologize for existing. Would have made her question whether she was overreacting, being dramatic, causing problems where there were none. Not anymore. Grace lifted her chin, meeting Terrell's eyes with a steadiness that surprised even her. Moving on, Terl. You should try it. Terrell's expression twisted confusion, anger, disbelief, all fighting for dominance on his face. His eyes flicked between her and Siwoo, measuring, calculating. With him? You don't even know him. I know him well enough, Grace lied. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice held steady. That's when Siwoo moved. Not dramatically. Not aggressively. He simply shifted his weight, adjusted his posture by mere inches, and suddenly he wasn't just tall anymore. He was a wall. Immovable. Quietly threatening without saying a single word. Is there a problem? Siwoo asked Terl. His tone remained polite, almost conversational. But there was steel underneath. Cold, controlled steel that made the temperature in their little corner drop several degrees. Terl hesitated. Grace watched something pass across her ex's face. Recognition, maybe. Or instinct. That primal part of the brain that knows when you're standing too close to something dangerous. Whatever it was, it made Terl take a step back. No problem, Terl muttered, but his eyes stayed locked on Siwoo for another few seconds. Some silent communication passed between them, male posturing, territorial warnings, things Grace couldn't fully decode. Then Terrell's gaze cut back to her. When you're done with whatever this is, call me. Grace felt the words before she spoke them. Felt them rise from somewhere deep and certain. I won't. The finality in her voice seemed to surprise them both. Terrell's jaw clenched. He threw one last look over his shoulder, a look that promised this conversation wasn't finished, before disappearing back into the crowd. Grace exhaled shakily, the adrenaline that had been holding her together starting to fracture at the edges. Siwoo's hand was still on her waist. Steady. Grounding. I'm so sorry, she said quietly. I shouldn't have dragged you into my mess. Siwoo tilted his head slightly, considering her. You didn't drag me. I chose to participate. He paused, and something shifted in his expression. But now I'm curious why a woman would kiss a complete stranger just to wound an ex-boyfriend. Grace felt Terrell's presence before she saw him. That familiar energy, the one that used to make her heart race in the beginning, back when she mistook intensity for passion. Now it just made her tense. He was weaving through the crowd, his jaw clenched tight, anger radiating off him in waves. The woman he'd been with her stood back near their table, watching with barely concealed interest. Grace. Terrell's voice cut through the bar noise. What the hell are you doing? 6 months ago, that tone would have worked. Would have made Grace scramble to explain herself, to justify her actions, to apologize for existing in a way that inconvenienced him. Not tonight. Grace lifted her chin, meeting his eyes with a steadiness she didn't entirely feel. Siwoo's hand remained lightly on her waist, a reminder that she wasn't alone in this. Moving on, Terl. You should try it. Terrell's eyes narrowed, flicking between her and Siwoo like he was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't make sense. With him. His voice dripped with disbelief. You don't even know him. I know him well enough, Grace lied smoothly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Terl took a step closer, his posture aggressive, territorial. This was the man who'd spent 2 years slowly convincing her that her feelings didn't matter, that her instincts were wrong, that she was too sensitive, too demanding, too much. That's when Siwoo moved. Not dramatically. Not aggressively. He simply shifted his weight, adjusted his stance by mere inches, and suddenly everything changed. He wasn't just standing beside Grace anymore. He was a barrier. Immovable. Silent. Dangerous. The temperature around them seemed to drop. Is there a problem? Siwoo asked. His voice remained polite, almost conversational. But underneath those 4 simple words was steel, cold, controlled, and absolutely unbending. Grace watched Terrell's face change. Watched confidence flicker and fade. Watched him actually take a step backward, his body responding to something his conscious mind hadn't quite processed yet. That primal instinct. The one that knows when you're standing too close to something that could hurt you. Terrell's eyes locked on Siwoo's, and for several seconds, neither man spoke. Some silent exchange passed between them, male posturing, territorial warnings, calculations of risk versus reward. Siwoo's expression never changed. He didn't need to puff up or threaten. His stillness was the threat. "No problem," Terl finally muttered. But his hands had curled into fists at his sides, and his jaw was clenched so tight Grace could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. He turned his attention back to Grace, and she saw it clearly now, what Siwoo had noticed immediately. That look of ownership. Like she was property he'd temporarily misplaced and would reclaim when this little tantrum ended. "When you're done with whatever this is," Terl said, each word deliberate, "call me." Grace felt something crystallize inside her chest. Something clear and final. "I won't." The words came out stronger than she expected. Definitive. No room for interpretation or negotiation. Terrell's expression flickered surprise, then anger, then something uglier. "You're making a mistake, Grace." "No," she said quietly. "I already made that mistake. 2 years ago when I believed you." He stared at her for another beat, then turned and walked away. But the look he threw over his shoulder before disappearing into the crowd promised this wasn't over. That he'd be back. That he wasn't done with her yet. Grace exhaled shakily, adrenaline flooding her system now that the confrontation was over. "I'm so sorry," she said to Siwoo. "I shouldn't have dragged you into my mess." Siwoo tilted his head slightly, studying her with those dark, perceptive eyes. "You didn't drag me. I chose to participate." He paused. "But now I'm curious why a woman would kiss a complete stranger just to wound an ex-boyfriend." Grace's hands were still shaking when Siwoo gestured to the bar stool beside him. "Sit," he said gently. Not a command. An invitation. She sat, grateful for something solid beneath her. Siwoo signaled the bartender with the slightest movement of his hand. Within seconds, a bottle appeared, label written in characters Grace couldn't read, glass so pristine it caught the light like crystal. He poured her a glass with careful precision, each movement deliberate. "You're drinking wine," he observed. "Let me buy you something better than what you ordered." Grace accepted the glass, tasting it. Smooth, complex, nothing like the acidic stuff she'd been nursing earlier. "Thank you." Now, Siwoo settled onto a stool, angled toward her, giving her space, but close enough that she felt protected. "Tell me." And somehow, that simple prompt broke something open inside her. The words came flooding out. 2 years with Terl. The slow erosion of her confidence. The way he'd convince her that her gut instinct was wrong, that she was overreacting, that her concerns about her, the woman he swore was just a colleague, were products of Grace's damaged past. He'd say things like, "Why are you being so paranoid?" Or, "Your father's cheating messed you up, and now you're punishing me for it," Grace explained, the familiar anger rising in her chest. And I believed him. I actually thought I was the problem. Siwoo listened without interrupting. His dark eyes tracked every micro-expression on her face, every shift in her voice. The kind of attention Grace had been starving for during those final months with Terl. "Then 2 weeks ago, I found messages on his phone," she continued. "Not even hidden. Just there. Months of conversations. Inside jokes. Plans I knew nothing about. Things he used to say to me, now said to her. And when you confronted him, he made it about me invading his privacy." Grace laughed bitterly. "Never apologized. Never admitted anything. Just made me feel guilty for finding evidence of exactly what I knew was happening." Siwoo was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Revenge, then." "Petty revenge," Grace corrected, embarrassed now. "The worst kind." "Not the worst," Siwoo said, his voice dropping to something darker. "Trust me." The way he said it sent a chill down her spine. Grace looked at him more carefully now. Really looked. The suit that fit too perfectly to be anything but custom-made. The watch on his wrist that she couldn't identify but knew instinctively cost more than several months of her rent. The scar along his jawline, faint but there, the kind that came from violence, not accidents. And the way people moved around him. She'd noticed it when she first approached, but now she saw it clearly. Other bar patrons giving him space. The bartender appearing instantly at his smallest gesture. A group of men near the pool tables who kept glancing over, their body language respectful but cautious. Her phone buzzed. Jasmine, girl, who is that man you're with, and why does everyone look like they're scared to breathe too loud? Grace's stomach tightened. She typed back quickly, what do you mean? Jasmine, I'm looking at your location. My cousin works security downtown. He says that bar is where certain, influential people go. Be careful. Grace looked up at Siwoo, her pulse quickening. Who are you? He didn't flinch. Didn't deflect. Someone you should probably stay away from. The honest answer should have sent her running. Should have made her grab her purse, thank him politely, and disappear. Instead, she leaned forward. You haven't answered my question. Siwoo smiled slightly. Import and export. Of what? Influence. He poured himself a glass of the same wine. Power. Solutions to problems people can't solve through traditional channels. Grace's throat went dry. And people know this? Some do. Siwoo's gaze held hers. Smart people know when to look the other way. 3 hours passed like minutes. They talked about everything and nothing. Grace told him about teaching kindergarten, about the kids who made her laugh, about the small joys that kept her going through the hardest parts of the breakup. Siwoo listened like her stories mattered, like her world, so different from his, held value. He didn't talk much about himself, but what he did share came in careful fragments. A family business he'd inherited too young. Choices that weren't really choices. A world where loyalty meant everything and betrayal meant consequences Grace probably couldn't fathom. You're easy to talk to, Grace said finally, the wine making her bolder. You're easy to listen to, Siwoo replied. Is that a line? No. Lines are what men use when they're pretending. His eyes held hers. I don't pretend. When he finally stood to leave, Grace felt the loss of his presence immediately. Like warmth leaving a room. Siwoo reached into his jacket and pulled out a card. Simple, elegant. Just a phone number embossed in black ink. If your ex becomes a problem, he said, pressing it into her palm, call me. Grace stared at the card. I can handle Terl. Siwoo's expression darkened. Men like him don't accept rejection well. I recognized the look in his eyes. What look? Ownership, Siwoo said quietly. He thinks you still belong to him. The words landed heavy between them, true in a way that made Grace's chest tight. Grace didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment. Siwoo's hand on her waist. His calm voice. The way he'd made her feel protected without making her feel small. It was different from Terl, who'd always made protection feel like a cage, like something she owed him gratitude for. The business card sat on her nightstand. Simple. Elegant. Dangerous. She kept reaching for it, then pulling her hand back. Morning came too quickly. Grace dragged herself through her routine shower, coffee, the comfortable anonymity of Saturday errands. She was halfway through folding laundry when someone knocked on her apartment door. Aggressive. Insistent. Grace checked the peephole and her stomach dropped. Terl. She considered not answering. But he knocked again, louder this time, and she didn't want her neighbors asking questions. We need to talk, Terl said the moment she opened the door. No, we don't. Grace moved to close it. He blocked it with his foot. That man you were with last night. Do you know who he is? Someone who isn't you. She pushed harder on the door. Grace, I'm serious. Terrell's expression was strained, his voice dropping to something that almost sounded like genuine concern. He's dangerous. Like, actually dangerous. My boy Carlos saw you two together and called me immediately. That's Siwoo. He runs half the underground business in this city. Her blood went cold, but Grace kept her face neutral. You're lying. I'm not. Terrell pushed into her apartment despite her resistance, closing the door behind him. Carlos works security at Club Azure. He knows things. Siwoo isn't just some businessman, Grace. He's connected. Heavy connected. The kind of man who makes problems disappear. Get out of my apartment. Since when do you care about my safety? Grace's voice came out sharper than she intended. Terl ran a hand over his face, looking genuinely frustrated. Since you started messing with people who could get you killed. You think I'm bad? You think I hurt you? Wait until you see what happens when you get involved with someone like him. You did hurt me, Grace said quietly. For 2 years. That's different and you know it. Terl stepped closer and Grace instinctively stepped back. What I did was wrong, okay? I admit it. But I never put you in physical danger. This man? He's not playing in the same league. You kiss him to make me jealous, fine. But you need to walk away now before you're in too deep. Grace studied his face. The concern looked real. But underneath it, she saw what Siwoo had identified instantly, that possessiveness. That ownership. Terl didn't want her safe. He wanted her away from Siwoo because it bruised his ego. Thank you for the warning, Grace said coldly. Now leave. Grace, leave. Or I'm calling the police. Terl stared at her for another long moment, then shook his head. Fine. When this blows up in your face, don't come crying to me. He left, slamming the door behind him. Grace stood in her apartment, heart racing, hands trembling. She walked to her nightstand and picked up Siwoo's card. Terl's words echoed in her head. Dangerous. Underground. Connected. She should throw it away. Block any possibility of contact. Pretend last night never happened. Grace stared at the numbers embossed on the card. Then she pulled out her phone and dialed. He answered on the first ring. Grace. The way Siwoo said her name made her chest tighten. Like he'd been waiting. Like he knew she'd call. Terl told me who you are, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Silence stretched between them, heavy with implication. Then, and what did he tell you? That you're dangerous. That you run underground operations. That I should stay away from you. He's right, Siwoo said calmly. No defensiveness. No justification. Just simple truth. You should. Grace sat down on her couch, phone pressed tight to her ear. Then why did you give me your number? Because, Siwoo's voice dropped lower, intimate despite the distance, I wanted you to have the choice he never gave you. Her breath caught. Choice. To walk away, Siwoo said. Or to call me anyway. Grace closed her eyes. Her logical brain screamed at her to hang up, delete the number, forget last night ever happened. But her heart, the part of her that had felt truly seen for the first time in years, refused to let go. I'm calling you anyway, she admitted quietly. Another pause. When Siwoo spoke again, his voice had changed. Harder. More controlled. Where are you? Home. Terl just left. Did he hurt you? No, but address, Siwoo interrupted, command replacing request. Now. Grace gave it to him. 20 minutes later, a knock echoed through her apartment. Soft. Controlled. Nothing like Terl's aggressive pounding. She checked the peephole and saw Siwoo standing in her hallway, hands in his pockets, perfectly still. Waiting patiently, like he had all the time in the world and nowhere more important to be. Grace opened the door. Siwoo's eyes swept over her, cataloging everything in seconds. Checking for injuries she didn't have. Searching for signs of distress. Only when he seemed satisfied did his shoulders relax slightly. You're okay? He asked. Yes. Grace stepped aside. But I need to know the truth. What Terl said, is it true? Siwoo didn't move from the doorway. Didn't try to come inside uninvited. Yes. And you're telling me to stay away from you? Yes. But you came here anyway. Yes, he said, and something vulnerable flickered across his face. Something that made him look less like the dangerous man from the bar and more like someone who'd been alone for far too long. Because last night, when you kissed me, it was the first honest thing that's happened to me in years. Grace's heart hammered against her ribs. It wasn't honest. It was revenge. It became honest, Siwoo corrected gently. Somewhere between that kiss and the third glass of wine. When you told me about your students. When you laughed at my terrible joke about the bartender's mustache. That was real. She couldn't argue because he was right. It had been real. Grace stepped aside wider, a clear invitation. Come in. Siwoo hesitated at the threshold, his expression serious. If I come in, Grace, things change. They already changed, she said. The moment I kissed you. He studied her for another long moment, giving her one final chance to reconsider. When she didn't move, didn't take back the invitation, Siwoo crossed into her apartment. With that single step, Grace felt her ordinary life shift on its axis. They sat on her couch, a cheap IKEA thing she'd bought after leaving Terl, and Siwoo told her everything. He didn't hide what he was. Didn't romanticize the darkness of his world. He explained the family business he'd inherited at 23 when his father died. The network of operations that weren't exactly legal, but filled spaces the law couldn't reach. The violence he'd committed to survive, to protect what was his, to maintain order in a world that operated outside normal rules. Why are you telling me this? Grace asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because you deserve to know what you're considering, Siwoo said. And what am I considering? His eyes met hers, dark and intense and absolutely certain. Me. The word hung between them. Heavy. Loaded. Full of implication. Grace should have been terrified. Should have asked him to leave. Should have chosen safety over whatever this was. Instead, she felt clarity. Terl is going to be a problem, she said quietly. I know. And being near you puts me in danger. Yes, but being without you. Grace trailed off, trying to find the right words. Being without you feels worse. Siwoo moved closer. Slowly. Deliberately. Giving her time to retreat, to change her mind, to choose differently. When she didn't move, he cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. I can protect you from everything except one thing, he said. What's that? Me, Siwoo admitted. If you do this, if you choose me, I won't be able to let you go easily. Grace's pulse raced. What if I don't want you to let go? He kissed her then. Not the performance from the bar. Not the test from last night. This was something else entirely. Deeper. Consuming. A promise and a warning wrapped together in a single moment that felt like falling and flying at the same time. When they broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. This is crazy, Grace whispered. Yes, Siwoo agreed, his forehead resting against hers. But sometimes crazy is the only honest choice left. They stayed on that couch for hours. Outside, the afternoon sun faded into evening, casting long shadows across Grace's small living room. Inside, time moved differently. Slower. More deliberate. Siwoo didn't sugarcoat anything. He painted his world in stark, honest strokes, no filters, no romantic glossing over the harsh realities. My father built the business from nothing, he explained, his voice quiet but steady. Started as a translator for Korean immigrants who couldn't navigate the legal system. Then he realized there were other needs. Loans when banks said no. Protection when police looked the other way. Solutions when traditional channels failed. Grace listened, her hand resting on his arm. And when he died? I was 23. Business management degree. Plans to work in corporate finance. Siwoo's jaw tightened. Then 3 men walked into his office and shot him 6 times. Her breath caught. They thought his death would create chaos. That the network would collapse. Siwoo's eyes went distant, remembering. I proved them wrong. Within a week, I'd found them. Within 2 weeks, they understood their mistake. Within 3 weeks, everyone knew the business hadn't weakened. It had gotten more dangerous. Grace should have recoiled. Should have seen red flags the size of buildings. Instead, she saw something else. A young man forced into impossible choices. A son who'd inherited violence he never asked for and learned to survive it. Do you regret it? She asked softly. Siwoo considered the question carefully. I regret that it was necessary. I don't regret protecting what my father built or the people who depend on that protection. The violence, Grace pressed, needing to understand fully. Can you walk away from it? No, he said honestly. It's part of my world. I can minimize it. I can choose when and how carefully. but I can't pretend it doesn't exist. Grace absorbed this. Thought about her kindergarten classroom with its colorful alphabet charts and finger painting stations. Thought about the two worlds colliding, hers soft and innocent, his sharp and necessary. I don't expect you to be part of that side, Siwoo continued, reading her expression. I would never bring that darkness to your door. But you need to understand it exists. That sometimes I'll come home late. That sometimes there will be blood on my hands I can't explain. That sometimes you'll have to trust me when I can't tell you everything. And if I can't? Grace asked. If I need more transparency than you can give? Then you walk away now, Siwoo said gently. Before we're both in too deep. Grace looked at him. Really looked. Saw the scar on his jaw, the weariness in his eyes that came from carrying weight most people never imagined. Saw the gentleness in how he touched her, the care in how he listened, the respect in how he'd given her every opportunity to choose differently. Terl had controlled through manipulation, through making her question her sanity, her worth, her reality. Siwoo controlled empires, but offered her complete freedom. The irony wasn't lost on her. Being without you feels worse, Grace said finally. Than any risk. Than any danger. I spent 2 years with someone safe who destroyed me slowly. One night with you made me feel more alive than those entire 2 years combined. Something shifted in Siwoo's expression. Relief. Wonder. Fear. All mixed together. I can protect you from everything except one thing, he warned again. What? Me, Siwoo said. If you choose this, if you choose us, I won't be able to let you go easily. I've spent years being alone, being untouchable. You've already changed that. And if I let myself fall completely? He trailed off, vulnerability written across every line of his face. Grace reached up, touching the scar on his jaw. Then fall. I'm choosing to catch you. He kissed her again. Slower this time. Deeper. A seal on promises neither of them fully understood yet, but both of them meant completely. When they finally pulled apart, Grace laughed softly. This is completely crazy. Yes, Siwoo agreed, a slight smile touching his lips. But sometimes crazy is the only honest choice left. Outside her window, the city lights flickered on one by one, ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware that in this small apartment, two worlds had just collided and decided to build something new from the wreckage. The next few weeks passed in a strange blur of normalcy and newness. Grace went to work, taught her kindergartners, graded papers, did laundry, all the ordinary things that made up her life. Except now, Siwoo was woven through it all. Terl disappeared. Completely. Grace heard through mutual friends that he'd taken a sudden job opportunity in another state. Left within days. Didn't tell anyone he was going, just vanished. Grace didn't ask Siwoo about it. Some things were better left unknown. Some questions had answers she wasn't ready to hear. What she did know, what became crystal clear in those first weeks, was that being with Siwoo felt nothing like being with Terl. Terl had controlled through erosion, slowly chipping away at her confidence, her instincts, her sense of self until she'd become a smaller, quieter version of herself. Every decision had required his approval. Every friend had needed his vetting. Every choice had to pass through his filter first. Siwoo never asked her to change anything. He adapted his dangerous world to make space for her softness instead of demanding she harden to fit his reality. When she mentioned feeling uncomfortable at a restaurant because the men at the next table kept staring, they simply left. No drama. No questions. Just immediate adjustment. When she needed to stay late at school for parent-teacher conferences, Siwoo's security appeared, invisible but present, making sure she got to her car safely without ever making her feel watched or controlled. He introduced her to his people, not as a possession or a trophy, as someone who mattered. This is Grace, he'd said to his second-in-command, a stern-faced man named Chin who looked like he'd seen every dark corner the world had to offer. She kissed me first. I was doomed from that moment. Chin had actually smiled. The best ones always doom us, boss. Grace learned to read the coded conversations that happened around Siwoo. The way meeting at the warehouse meant something entirely different from meeting at the office. The way certain phone calls made him go still, his expression shutting down into something unreadable. She learned about the security protocols. Why her routine had to vary slightly each day. Why certain restaurants were safe and others weren't. Why Siwoo's driver always took different routes home. She learned what the blood on his knuckles meant when he came home late some nights, trying to wash it off before she noticed. Learned to recognize when he needed to talk and when he just needed her to hold him until the darkness passed. One night, she found him standing at her apartment window at 3 in the morning, shoulders tense, lost in thought. "Do you want to talk about it?" Grace asked softly from the bedroom doorway. Siwoo turned, his expression unreadable. Then it softened. "No, but I need you to know I'm okay." She crossed to him, wrapped her arms around his waist from behind, rested her cheek against his back. "I'm here when you're ready." His hands covered hers. "I know." They stood like that for a long time. Grace learning that love in Siwoo's world meant accepting the shadows alongside the light. Meant trusting him with the parts he couldn't share. Meant building something strong enough to hold both their truths, her innocence and his experience, her softness and his necessary hardness. It wasn't easy, but it was real. And after 2 years of Terl's manufactured reality, real was everything Grace needed. 3 months after that impulsive kiss, Siwoo came home late. Grace was curled up on his couch. She spent more nights at his place now than her own apartment, wearing one of his dress shirts and reading a novel she'd been trying to finish for weeks. The soft lamp beside her cast warm light across the pages. She heard his key in the lock. Heard him enter. But when she looked up, he'd stopped in the doorway, just watching her. "What?" Grace asked, smiling at his expression. Siwoo didn't answer immediately. He stood there, suit jacket over one arm, tie loosened, hair slightly disheveled from whatever his night had held. Just staring at her like she was something precious he couldn't quite believe existed. "I love you," he said simply. The words hung in the air between them. He'd never said it before. Neither had she, though Grace had felt it for weeks now. Felt it in every careful touch, every protective instinct, every moment he chose her peace over his pride. Her book slipped from her hands. "I love you too." Siwoo crossed the room and knelt beside the couch, taking her hands in his. His grip was firm, grounding, real. "I never believed in fate," he said quietly, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "I thought everything was strategy. Planning. Force. Control. That's how I survived. How I built what I built." Grace waited, knowing he needed to say this. "Then you kissed me," Siwoo continued, his voice dropping lower, more vulnerable than she'd ever heard it. "And for the first time in my life, I was grateful for chaos. For the unplanned moment. For the one thing I couldn't control or predict." Tears pricked Grace's eyes. "You gave me something I didn't know I was missing," he said. "What's that?" "A reason to want peace instead of power." Grace's breath caught. She understood what that meant. What it cost him to admit. Siwoo's expression shifted then. Became more determined. More certain. "Marry me," he said. Grace laughed, surprised, her tears spilling over. "That's not a question." His lips curved slightly. "Marry me?" Softer this time. A question. A plea. A hope wrapped in 2 words. "Yes," Grace whispered. "Yes." He pulled her down from the couch, kissing her like he had that first night, like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling through tears. "Best worst decision I ever made," Grace said, repeating what had become their private joke. "No," Siwoo corrected gently, touching his forehead to hers. "Best honest choice you ever made." And in that moment, Grace knew he was right. She'd kissed a stranger to wound an ex-boyfriend. But somewhere between that kiss and this proposal, she'd found something infinitely more valuable. She'd found home. The wedding was small. Private. Nothing like the ostentatious display Siwoo could have arranged with a single phone call. Just 20 people who mattered. Grace's mother, who cried through the entire ceremony. Her best friend Jasmine, who'd warned her about mysterious strangers and now stood as her maid of honor, tears streaming down her face. Siwoo's inner circle, Chin, and a handful of others who'd become family rather than employees. No elaborate venue. No hundreds of guests. No performance. Just promises that meant everything. They stood in a garden at sunset, the city skyline visible in the distance. Grace wore a simple white dress. Siwoo wore a perfectly tailored suit. And when they kissed, sealing vows that acknowledged both the beauty and the danger of what they'd chosen, it felt nothing like that first impulsive kiss in the bar. This kiss started a marriage instead of a performance. Later that night, alone in the hotel suite Siwoo had reserved, Grace traced the scar on his jaw. The one she'd noticed that very first night. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Meeting me the way you did?" "Never," Siwoo said without hesitation. "You gave me something I didn't know I was missing." "What's that?" "A reason to want peace instead of power." He pulled her closer. "My whole life, I chased control. Influence. Respect through fear. Then you kissed me, and suddenly none of that mattered as much as making you smile." Grace felt her chest tighten with emotion. "And you gave me something too." "What?" "Proof that the right kind of danger," she said, smiling through fresh tears, "is worth every risk." Siwoo kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. Outside their window, the city hummed with life. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. Extraordinary people navigating extraordinary circumstances. All of it existing together, the light and the dark, the safe and the dangerous, the planned and the chaotic. Just like them. Grace Brown had kissed a stranger to make her ex-boyfriend jealous. She'd made an impulsive decision fueled by hurt and anger and the desperate need to feel something other than broken. She couldn't have known that stranger would become her husband. Her protector. Her home. Sometimes the worst decisions become the best choices. Sometimes danger wears a kind face. Sometimes love doesn't arrive safely wrapped in predictability and comfort. Sometimes it arrives with a kiss, a stranger, and the courage to choose truth over fear. So here's my final question, family. Would you have kissed the stranger? Would you have taken that leap knowing what was coming? Knowing the danger, the risk, the complete upheaval of everything safe and familiar? Comment below with yes or a no. I want to hear from every single one of you. And if this story moved you, if it made you feel something, hit that like button right now. It helps more than you know. Subscribe because more powerful stories about love, courage, and life-changing choices are coming your way. Sometimes love doesn't arrive safely. Sometimes it arrives with a kiss, a stranger, and the courage to choose your truth over your fear. Thank you for being here with me today, family. Until next time, keep choosing bravely.